How is it what you do actually like or unlike, and what you thought your life profession would be?
Well, interestingly, when I actually started my major, environmental engineering, I had no idea what it really was. So it's a lot different than what I thought it was, because I didn't know what it was at all. And I chose it because I really wanted to do something with math and science. And I knew engineering did that. And my dad was an engineer, so I had some vague idea that, math and science was involved in engineering. And I looked down the list, and he was a chemical engineer, so I wasn't going to be that. So I looked down the list of all the different kinds of engineers you could be, and environmental was there. And it was a fairly new field when I first took it. And I thought, well, that sounds really cool. I bet you're outside, you do stuff with animals, you're in national parks, you're in the forest, this has got to be cool. I had no idea what it did, didn't bother to research, or, of course we didn't have the internet then, so it was a little harder. Went in the field with no idea what it was, and didn't find out till my junior year in college what I was really going to be doing. So I must say, it's not that. It's not at all about the forests and the parks and animals or anything like that. But it turns out I liked what it was. It's really about water. For me anyway, I went to water and wastewater, but you could also go into air or solid waste with that major, and I chose water and wastewater, and ended up really liking it. And another thing I thought was that math would be super, super important, and I would have to do all these really complicated math problems, and they kind of scare you when you first go into engineering that, there's going to be a lot of math. During school, there was. When you get out, there's not. So as a practicing engineer, I probably needed to know nothing more than algebra, and add, subtract, multiply, divide, setting up an equation, maybe square rooting something once in a while. But my field, for me personally, hasn't been that math heavy. But I realize that math sort of teaches you how to solve problems. Like, that's really what math and science, they teach you how to set up a problem, how to look at a problem, how to solve a problem. And a lot of engineering is just problem solving. It can be all different kinds of problems, and it's just a matter of kind of sitting down and thinking about, well, how do I solve this particular problem I'm faced with? And in my world, those problems are around water. And since water is kind of fundamental to everything else that we do, I have to look at those kinds of problems and address those. And I feel like the math and science I took really helped me. But I don't need to use tons of it in my field. I did get to go outside somewhat. When I go to water and wastewater plants, I do get to go outside, which is kind of nice. And in the earlier part of my career, I spent a lot of time at manufacturing facilities and doing wastewater treatment there, and I really enjoyed seeing how things were made, and that kind of helped get me into some of that science and engineering of just looking like, how do you get from here all the way to a finished product? One of the big surprises too has been how much communication is involved in engineering, and kind of the ideas people have about engineers, and you're back in the corner and you don't deal with people, and you don't have to talk to anybody, and you're always looking down. That's not been my experience. My experience has been you do a lot of writing and speaking to people and communicating. So I think in that way it's probably different than my original concept of what engineering was all about. But it turns out I do really like what I'm doing, and I'm glad I got into that field, even though it wasn't necessarily what I originally thought. But I'm really happy in it now.
I think it's very interesting how you didn't end up using all that math that you learned in college. And I think that's one of the things that intimidates women to enter that field. So I think it's very important for you to communicate that, because maybe, as you said before, it was for you to learn how to solve problems rather than to actually apply it in your field.
Exactly, and I think that's really true, because some people feel like, oh, if I don't do perfectly great in math, I'm going to fail as an engineer, and that's not really true. So it's okay if you struggle a little bit in it. It's okay to work out the problems and not know how to do every little thing, because it really is just about trying to train your brain to think through logically, and how do you write down everything you know and work through it. So don't get so intimidated that all the engineering fields are tons and tons of math, because most of my colleagues I've talked to have said sort of the similar things, unless you're really in researchy world, which is just a small section of the engineering world. If you're out there practicing, it's not as much math as what you might first think. So don't be afraid to come into engineering. I think if you absolutely detest math, it's probably not the place for you, but don't think that you have to be the world's greatest math person to be an engineer, because that's definitely not true.
I think that's very good to know. Tell me about a time when you were really challenged, and how did you overcome it?
So what I'm going to talk about is something that happened about 7 or 8 years ago, and it was probably the most challenging time in my career ever since I started. And this was a case where I was working for a different place than I'm working for now, and the situation had kind of gotten dire, and upper management, people above me, were trying to ask me to do something to solve one of their problems, a financial problem, in a way that I felt was completely unethical, and if not unethical, illegal. And I really couldn't do it. But there was nowhere to go, so the whole way up the chain of command was in favor of me doing things I shouldn't be doing. So the only choice I had was to leave, and I had a lot of people working for me at the time, so it was going to be, what would happen to them as well. So we all kind of got together and decided that we would have to leave that situation and try to go somewhere else. Super difficult decision to make, but I felt that we were being treated so unfairly and so disrespectfully that it was no longer something that I could stay and do. So we all quit, myself included, and then you're faced with the reality of, now what? I have all these people that have just quit with me, and we have to get back employed again. And so it was a couple months of really, really difficult soul searching, and I didn't eat a whole lot, I didn't sleep very well, it was really, really stressful. But sometimes you have to be pushed out the window to actually make a move that was probably something that should have been happening a long, long time before that. Things hadn't been good for a while, and that push to try to get out and do something took me to a much better place where I am now, and it's 100% better, and I feel really good about the fact that I didn't go down the path that they wanted me to go on. And I feel like I really had a lot of support from my colleagues, both the people who worked for me and all the colleagues that I have around the country. And I had some women colleagues of mine that we were really, really close, and I could call on them and know they were there for me and really help me through it. And anytime I needed to, I could pick up the phone and call them. And I also thought it was helpful that my family had really instilled strong values in me when I was growing up. And just my faith and spirituality also brought that inner core that I could kind of focus on and say, this is really who I am, and I can't go against who I am. And that was, quite powerful in me, that I could kind of make that leap and just say, okay, it's all going to work out. I'm going to have to believe, because I've always thought you can't control anybody but yourself. So I can't control the situation around me, but I can control how I deal with it. So when I made that leap, it thankfully worked out really well. It worked out well for all of us. We're all back working together again. And so sometimes you just got to do that. And I'll say, I think part of what I went through was because I was a woman, because I think I would have been treated differently if I was a man. I think there was a lot of that going on. Almost everybody I worked with above me was a man, and I think there was some of that. So the fact that I had grown up with 3 brothers and no sister actually helped me, because I was used to that kind of situation where I had to stand up for myself and not let somebody push me around. And I feel really proud of the fact that I was able to stand up and do it, and I'm really glad that it worked out and everything is fine now.
That's good. Do you think that it has changed in the past years, the way people, or how you get treated in your field for being a woman?
I think it's gotten better when I look back, but I still think we have quite a ways to go. But when I think back to the beginning of my career, my very first job, I was one of 200 who were engineers at the company. I was the only woman engineer they had. And it was really rough, because the only other women that worked at the company at that time were secretaries. And they resented me being an engineer. So when I tried to be friends with them, it didn't work out so great. And then you try to be friends with the men, and some of them resented me for being a woman. And for a while, I felt really isolated in trying to get a friend group. And eventually I did. I got a good group of both men friends and then some of the women that worked there. became my friends, but there were some really hard times that I faced. You know, just being a woman in engineering was not easy. Some of my professors were not the greatest people. The things that they said then, they would never be allowed to say today. But so some of that was really bad at one time, and I think it has gotten better. There's more women in engineering and STEM in general now than there was then, but we still have a ways to go, because I still think there's sort of a bias against women in STEM. And interestingly, I just took the Harvard has this IAT test that's supposed to measure your biases, and I took one that's it measures your bias in men and women in STEM, and to see if you have a bias towards men in STEM and women. I was sure if I took that test, my bias would be towards women in STEM, but no. I actually had a slight bias toward men in STEM. So, you know, we still have that strong, and then that was where most people in the whole country were, because they give you at the end like how you rank compared to other people. And almost everybody has a bias towards men belong in STEM and women not, women in liberal arts. So I think there's still that sort of unconscious bias that we have, and it's going to take us a while, but it's definitely gotten better than it used to be, so I'm glad for that.
That's good. Still a work in progress.
Definitely.
What has been your funniest on-the-job mishap?
So I'll tell you a couple of them, one that was older and one that's more recent. So the first one was like my very first time out in the field with my boss. So I had not been on the job very long, but I had been stuck in the office writing manuals, and my boss finally said I was going to get my trip out into the field. We were going to go to this wastewater treatment plant that our company had designed, and we were going to start it up. So we got in the car, we drove. I was living in Pennsylvania then. We drove to central Pennsylvania, and they made picture tubes for TVs, which TVs don't even have picture tubes anymore. And we were setting up this plant, turning it on, and we came to this tank. And inside the tank, there were these two rods, and one would be a little longer than the other one. So when the water level hit the shorter rod, it completed a circuit between the two rods, and a pump would start. So my boss, because there's no water in the tank, my boss wants to see if the pump will run. He picks up this long screwdriver and touches the screwdriver across the rods, and that completes the circuit. The pump turns on. So I'm thinking, wow, that was a pretty cool trick. You know, I knew nothing about construction, had no background whatsoever. So he walks away, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, this is really cool. I'm going to do this too. So I pick up the screwdriver. 50% chance I'll pick it up with the right end of the screwdriver, 50% chance I'll pick it up with the wrong end. So I pick it up with the wrong end of the screwdriver. I pick up the metal end, stick it on the two bars, and shocked myself. And when you get shocked, you can't release, because your nerves get kind of affected by the electricity. So it didn't hurt me, because I didn't complete the circuit through my heart. So I was okay, but it was like, then I couldn't let go. And then I didn't want to say anything, because I didn't want my boss to know how stupid I was. And there are, of course, all these other men. Again, you know, I'm one of the only women. It's like, I don't want all these construction people to know I've done this really stupid thing either. So I'm just standing there holding this thing and trying to let go until finally my hand released, and it seemed like forever. I'm sure it wasn't that long. And the screwdriver clanked into the bottom of the tank. And then I had to figure out how to get into the tank to get the screwdriver out. So it was not my best foray into the world of starting up treatment plants. But forever, the rest of my life, I remembered never ever to pick up a screwdriver with the wrong end of the screwdriver. So it has taught me how to make sure I'm safe from now on. So I think sometimes you learn more from your mishaps than you do from doing it right. If I'd have done it right, I wouldn't have learned anything, because I wouldn't have realized that I had done it right. So the other one is more recently, I do a lot of training. I go around to different parts of the country and do training. And this was a few years back, and I was training in Hawaii. And I was on the Big Island, which is pretty sparsely populated. And we were down in a very sparse area of the island. We had about 30 people coming for training. I wanted to make sure everything was all set up. I show up an hour early. I get my computer set up. They had provided the projector. I plugged it all in. Everything's working great. I'm all ready to go. the guests, the participants come in, they sit down, we go through the whole process of introducing everybody, and my intro slide is up on the screen, and I just get ready to click to the next slide, and it all goes black. I thought, wait a minute, it was all set up, what happened? So we tell everybody, oh, you gotta take a break, even though we just started, get the IT people that we could find in the room. Oh, the light bulb's burned out. Well, there's no way you're gonna get another projector and another light bulb in a remote rural part of Hawaii. So then I'm faced with 8 hours with no computer, no projector, no PowerPoint, no nothing. So then it's sort of like, okay, now what? So I said, well, guess what? We're going old school. There was a chalkboard on the wall. It took us a while to find a piece of chalk, because of course nobody uses chalkboards anymore. And we turned the whole room sideways and used the chalkboard and carried on for the rest of the day without any technology. So again, I remember it fondly as like one of my funnier trainings, but it all worked out. It was all fine, but it was kind of fun, like just to see it go black, like, oh no.
Yeah, I think especially now we are starting to go back to things we stopped doing.
Mm-hmm.
And we rely a lot on technology, but we also need to remember how we used to do things, just in case something like that happens.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. People say, what'd you do before the internet? And it's hard to remember. Because, yeah, I grew up before the internet. There wasn't even computers. At my first company, I was the first woman, well, actually the first person at the company to have a computer on my desk. The very first one.
Wow.
So it was a huge, big deal at our company, because it was bad enough that a really young engineer had a computer, and the only woman engineer had a computer, and the vice president of the company wanted it to be in his office, and have me sit in his office and use it. And I had to fight tooth and nail to say, no, that's not going to work out, because I had a project that needed a computer, and I got the people there to say, well, I can't do this without a computer. So I got to actually program how a wastewater treatment plant would be operated via computer. And I was the closest person to know anything about a computer, since I was the newest out of school. So that's how I ended up getting tagged for it, even though I didn't know a whole lot about it. They sent me to training, and then here I was just sitting there. And at that time, it had one color. There was no windows, no nothing, but we made it through. We made it work.
That's good. What advice would you have for someone starting out in your field?
So I think the biggest advice I would give somebody is to just believe in yourself and have confidence in yourself. Because if you don't believe in yourself, it's hard for others to believe in you. It's hard for them to have the confidence in you. And I think there's a lot of things you can do to really help build that confidence. So being a sponge is one of those. In your early career, just watching everybody, and that's a lot of what I did when I first started, is just observing how people did things. Like I was trying to with my boss, which, didn't quite work out the way it's supposed to. But just watching, how do people behave in certain situations, and what kind of questions do they ask, and how do they ask them, and learning all you can around, even beyond what they assign you, but can you learn more about things? So I used to ask people questions when they weren't super busy. Hey, what's it like to be, design engineer? How do you do that part? And, what's it like to meet with the people who do the construction or something? Just asking lots and lots of questions and really acting like a sponge to really soak in all that information. And then I like to tell people too, another way to build confidence and belief in yourself is that whenever you're given an assignment, do it the absolute best you can. Like, it doesn't matter how trivial it might seem to you. Somebody needs that done. They didn't ask you to do that just because they need it done. And if you do that well, it builds confidence people have in you, because they know, oh, I could trust that person to do that job, so I can trust them to do something higher level. And sometimes people think nobody notices if you did a good job or not, because they might not say, hey, that was great, you did a great job copying. I mean, that's unlikely to happen in the workforce, but they've logged it away. Like, oh, I asked this person to do it, they did it well, so the next time I have something, I know I can ask this person, that they have my trust, I have their trust. And, you know, as an example, when I do these trainings that I talked about before, I have to take a lot of papers with me, or at least used to when we were allowed to travel. And it was important that somebody copied them the right way, in the right order, that they were stapled and sorted a certain way. And I've had people who didn't take it seriously, and then you show up and they're all a mess, and you don't have enough of this, and you have too many of those, and people aren't getting their handouts, and they get upset. And then you lose confidence in a person who doesn't want to take those kinds of jobs seriously. So I think it's super important, no matter what they assign you, give it your best. I mean, you're getting paid to do that. It may not be your favorite activity, but if you do it well, that will get you, you know, further along down the road. Because you never know who's watching and when they're watching and how you might end up, you know, in a certain situation. Just like I had no idea when I started my job that I would end up with a computer on my desk, you know, programming the wastewater recycle system. But I had done a lot of other things up to that point really well that other people would have thought were super menial, but because I had done them well, they had enough confidence to have me try something else. So I think you really need to dig into whatever somebody's given you and just do your best at that job. And we tell everybody we interview, there is no job that's beneath anybody. Like, I'm just as likely to pick up paper and put it in the copy machine and make copies as anybody. So it's really important to remember there's no hierarchy or nothing's beneath anybody, that we're all kind of a team and we work together. Just to make sure that you know, everybody's doing their best at all times, because I think that's super important. And then the last thing I would say is try to be passionate about what you're doing. So usually people say, do what you're passionate about. And that's not always possible, because sometimes you don't even know what you're passionate about. Like, I was not passionate about water when I started. I didn't even know that's what my field was. So how could I possibly say I went into it because I was passionate about it? Because that isn't true. I didn't know much of anything about water, but I became passionate once I got into it and learned. And I think that's something where sometimes you have to find that passion in yourself. And what is it about my job that I like? So I like helping people, and my job lets me help people. So I really like that part of it. And so I really focus in on being passionate about how I can make this better for everybody. How can I make a water operator's job better? How can I make a manager's job better? How can I help the water utility fund itself better so that it can serve its customers? And I've become passionate about my job and love what I do and very passionate about it, but I had to build that passion over time. So I think sometimes if we take a step back and say, well, what can I be passionate about what I'm doing, and let it grow over time, you might find out you really like something that you didn't know about at first, instead of always feeling like, well, if I don't hit it right away, it must not be the right thing. Sometimes it takes a little while and you kind of let it build up, and then it turns out, yeah, this is an okay thing for me to do.
I have one more question.
Sure.
If you could go back to when before you started college, what would you tell yourself back then?
Oh, that's a really good question. So what I would tell myself is relax. It's a long haul, and I think I would have made different decisions if I would have known that. So when I went to Penn State as an undergraduate, and as I mentioned, environmental engineering was a really new field at that time, and most people did what I did through a civil engineering degree. And I got towards the end of my junior year, beginning of my senior year, and the department wanted me to stick around and do a dual degree in civil and environmental, because I had taken a lot of extra credits just because I liked classes. I took a lot of things that weren't required classes, and they said, oh, you'd be great to just stick around, and they told me I'd have to stay one more year. That was required. So even though I had almost enough credits for a dual degree, they said you have to stay a year anyway, and you can just kind of take some classes you like or do what you want. And I was in such a hurry. No, I got to get out into the work world. And a whole year, oh my gosh, you know, waiting a whole year to start my job would be horrible. So I didn't do it, and it was a huge mistake. I wished I would have stayed for another year. College was a lot of fun. The civil engineering degree would have really helped me at the beginning part of my career, because not only was I a woman in engineering, but I was an environmental engineer, which wasn't respected at that time. It's changed, but at that time I kept getting this, well, we would let you do this, but you're environmental, you're not civil. And I kept like, dang, I wish I would have stayed and gotten that, but I was in such a hurry, like, oh, I've got to start my life, I got to get out there, I got to get working. And you find out that that just means I work an extra year. Like, you know, you're still going to probably retire about the same time. So I just started and had to work an extra year. So I think I would say relax, take a breath. It's a long haul. You don't have to do it all tomorrow. You can take your time. You can really meander a path. I wish I would have known that, because I was in a real big hurry to do everything. I'm actually a big proponent of people taking a year off to even, you know, between high school and college, just to experience some things, because I think sometimes, again, we're in such a hurry to get on with our lives. And at 18, what do you know about what you want to do, or, you know, where you're going to go, or what your life is going to look like? And I think you have a lot more time than you realize. So that's probably what I would have told myself, is just relax. It's okay. You know, take some time.
Yes, I think we lack the patience that it takes to actually know what we want to do. And yeah, that's very good.
And even when you come out and work, like, you feel like you know everything. So you've just gone through this whole degree, and, you know, you spent 4 years being taught all this stuff, and you come out thinking, well, I know it all. I'm ready to, like, just jump way up the ladder and be way up here, and you don't know anywhere near as much as you think you do. So again, I think it's like that patience to say, well, it might take me a year or two to really get integrated into this, wherever I'm working, the company or wherever you end up, you know, being an employee. And that's okay. Again, it's a long haul, so give it some time. You're not going to be given, you know, the star assignment the first day on the job, because nobody knows you, and you got to get integrated. So I think, again, just that patience to take a breath and say, okay, if I just relax, you know, eventually I'll get there. You know, it's okay. I can take a little bit of time. You know, they're not going to give me the plum assignment today, but eventually they will if I just, you know, wait it out. So, you know, deep breath.
Yeah, I lack that patience myself, so I completely understand that.